Sometimes you see something in the news and it just feels like, well, like it opens up a whole world of complexity underneath.
Mm.
I definitely got that feeling watching the reports on President Trump's recent trip to the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. Big headlines weren't there.
Huge. I mean, you had these massive multi-trillion-dollar business deals announced with the UAE, with Qatar.
Brazilians, yeah.
And then that meeting with the Syrian president, first time in, what, 25 years?
A really significant diplomatic moment, potentially.
But the thing that really seemed to explode online, the part everyone was suddenly talking about, was the welcome he got in the UAE.
Right, that viral clip. It was everywhere almost instantly. You saw this group, maybe 20, 30 Emirati women, all in traditional clothing, performing this dance that involved, well, flipping their hair, synchronized, rhythmic hair flipping.
The Alayal dance, is that right?
That's it, Alayal. Now, traditionally, Alayal is actually quite different. It's usually more like a simulated battle, often with men, poetry, drums. It's a deep part of Bedouin heritage. So seeing it performed by women, focusing just on the hair movement, that was the specific part that caught everyone's eye.
And the official line, the intention, was that this was an authentic Bedouin welcome, a gesture of hospitality, showcasing heritage.
That seems to be the intended message, yes. Hospitality, tradition.
But it didn't quite land that way globally, did it? It seemed to spiral a bit.
It really did. Instead of just being seen as cultural exchange, it sort of became, well, a bit of a global joke in some circles.
Yeah, I saw that. Lots of commentary, not all of it positive.
Exactly. Social media just lit up. You had sarcastic captions, memes. And unfortunately, you also saw comments that, frankly, seemed to come from a place of misunderstanding or even prejudice about Islamic culture generally.
All triggered by this one performance. Some people online were calling the welcome itself absolutely hilarious.
The phrase popped up, yeah.
Okay, so let's get into that performance itself, the Alayal. Because a major point that came up immediately was his claim that the dance has, quote, no connection to Islam. That it's purely a Bedouin tribal thing separate from religious practice.
That's a really crucial distinction people were making. The argument is basically, yes, the UAE is a Muslim country, but this specific dance comes from older, pre-Islamic Bedouin traditions that aren't necessarily endorsed or seen as part of Islam itself.
Right.
In fact, some perspectives argue there's actually a tension there, a potential conflict between the performance and certain Islamic principles.
Attention. How so? Because the sources we looked at mentioned Islamic ideas about modesty.
Precisely. Modesty is key here. The argument is that having women dancing, particularly with their heads uncovered, in front of men they aren't closely related to.
Non-mahrams is the term.
Yes, non-mahams. So men who aren't husbands, fathers, brothers, sons, etc. That kind of public performance is seen by some interpretations within Islam as potentially conflicting with the principles of modesty expected for women in public spaces.
So it highlights that clash you can sometimes get between, say, cultural traditions and specific religious interpretations.
Exactly. And it brings up history, too. Our sources mention a period sometimes called the rebirth of Islam, where certain older tribal customs, things seen as maybe incompatible with Islamic teachings, were actively discouraged.
So choosing this specific performance in this high-profile moment, that's why it raised eyebrows.
It definitely prompted questions. And think about the contrast, too. The UAE projects this image of, modernity, incredible prosperity.
Right, very forward-looking in many ways.
So the question becomes, why choose this specific performance to represent the nation's identity there? Why not something more overtly tied to Islamic faith or value? Well, like Quranic recitation or highlighting the practice of prayer or symbols like the hijab or the general emphasis on humility that's quite central in Islamic teaching.
It's a stark contrast. One source we saw used really strong words, describing the performance almost like a haunted ritual instead of a dignified welcome.
Wow, yeah. That really shows the disconnect some people felt between what was intended and how it was received.
But the dance wasn't the only controversial point from the visit, was it? There was also something about the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque.
Ah, yes, that became another major discussion point. A huge, beautiful, very important mosque in Abu Dhabi. And the report was that during Trump's visit, it was actually closed to regular worshipers.
Closed, why?
The reason given was apparently to let President Trump see the mosque in peace and solitude.
Peace and solitude. Okay. On one level, maybe that sounds considerate, but There's another way to look at it, isn't there?
There really is. A strong counter-argument emerged saying this was a huge missed opportunity. Well, imagine the impact if he had seen it active. If he'd witnessed Muslims actually praying there, maybe heard the call to prayer, experienced the living faith within that incredible building, the argument is that that would have been a much more powerful, more authentic representation of Islam than just seeing an empty, albeit beautiful, structure.
Yeah, I can see that. It reminds me of the comparison someone made with the World Cup in Qatar.
Exactly. That was brought up in our sources.
Because there, it seemed like there was a conscious effort to showcase Islamic identity. You had Quran verses displayed, sayings of the Prophet, scholars present.
Right. It felt much more integrated, like a deliberate statement. This is who we are, this is our faith, and we want to share aspects of it.
It felt like Qatar was saying, we're Muslim and proud of it.
A very different approach, which then leads back to the UAE visit and the question, okay, so what message did come across? Was the message that this particular tribal dance, with women performing for a non-Mahram leader, is the defining culture and an empty mosque? It definitely leaves you thinking about the signals being sent.
And then there's maybe the toughest part of this whole picture. The timing. All these huge deals being signed, this focus on wealth and partnership, set against the backdrop of really serious suffering happening nearby among fellow believers.
That adds a really profound ethical layer, doesn't it? The source material we reviewed brought up a very well-known hadith, a saying from the Prophet Muhammad.
Which one was that?
He is not a believer whose stomach is full while the neighbor to his side is starving.
Wow, that's direct.
It is, and it was presented as a kind of commentary on this situation, highlighting what some see as a disconnect, maybe even the dark truth, as the source put it, regarding the priorities of some leaders in the region.
It raises that really difficult question. What kind of Islam are we showing the world? If there are grand welcomes and deals happening here, while the cries of neighbors in need seem to go unheard, it questions that sense of solidarity.
It absolutely does. The source ended that thought very powerfully. The world is watching, and most importantly, Allah is watching. It puts the focus on a kind of ultimate accountability, beyond just politics or optics, and includes a prayer. May Allah guide our leaders to the straight path before it's too late. Amen.
So, pulling it all together, you've got these massive economic deals happening. You've got a cultural welcome that becomes a global point of controversy and misunderstanding. You have a major mosque closed to worshipers during the visit. And all this happening while this stark ethical question hangs in the air about wealth versus the suffering of neighbors.
Yeah.
It's a lot of contradiction packed into one visit.
It really is. It serves as a kind of microcosm, doesn't it? A snapshot of the intense pressures and complex choices facing nations today. How do you balance projecting national identity, cultural heritage, religious values, and pursue economic and political goals on a global stage?
Right. What messages end up getting sent, intentionally or not?
And how do those big political and economic moves stack up against fundamental ethical or religious responsibilities?
It definitely leaves you with a lot to think about regarding how culture, faith, money, and politics all tangle together in our modern world.